Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to add my thoughts to some reporting on how Labour advisers viewed the Democrats' campaign. Several have been saying that they were dismayed that Harris's team were not focusing on some of the things that they feel helps Labour win this year, although there are a few other things I think that are a bit more dubious. But the main source of optimism is that Labour are again reiterating that they think the main election factor these days is not the economy, stupid, but specifically how voters feel about it. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, there's a report in The Guardian sets out where Labour advisers think the Democrats went wrong. Now, I'm not interested in that specifically because, first of all, there should be a proper investigation, serious analysis before too many firm conclusions are drawn. What does interest me, however, is how Labour advisers viewed the situation, because that tells us about Labour's strategy here for the next general election in the UK, which is my main concern. And some of their views are very encouraging. A couple of worrying signs, but mostly encouraging. So the encouraging stuff first is that they talk about the fact that a focus on the economy isn't working here. So Labour had this thing, they had these missions, and one of them was the highest sustained growth in the G7, and they're not leaning on that as much now. In fact, it says in the article that Labour advisors are actively sort of trying to go, yeah, let's dial that one down, because they recognise it isn't working. They've said no voter wants to hear about the highest growth in the G7. They want to hear about the price of a Tesco shop. I thought, yes, good, just as well, because the highest sustained growth in the G7, that was a mathematical nonsense anyway. I was already worried about that one as it was. But although they haven't dropped the mantra altogether, because I noticed Rachel Reeves referred to it when answering a question to the Treasury Select Committee last week, I'll be glad they're winding it down. There are two positives here. The first is that it shows that Labour can actually learn lessons, because they went with that mission board, highest sustained, because they thought that would be really good. They thought it'd be a really good selling point. Now they recognise it's not. And, and I know it seems over the past few months it doesn't look like they've learnt lessons, but I would say switching from a major campaign line takes determined effort, because it shows you're not going to be tied down to what you recognise as your mistakes. The second, obviously, is that it is correct. People don't vote based on GDP or even inflation. Now, reports of inflation can be a bit, can have an impact on the public, I think. But, GDP, no, people don't know what GDP is. So it's how they feel about it. The point was made that Biden really did increase the number of jobs in America. But if you weren't one of the people getting those jobs, like if you already had one and it was a crap job and you didn't get a better one, then it didn't actually do anything for you. Labour are creating new jobs with their energy plans. We're going to hear more about that this week with COP. Keir Starmer, one of the few world leaders actually going to COP this year. But that, again, just like in America, will only benefit some people. And even then, not everyone who does benefit will necessarily see it as linked to government action. A job just came up and they applied for it and they got, this is a better job. They don't necessarily see that it's down to government action. But everyone sees cost of living pressures when inflation is high and incomes are squeezed. And they'll decide that the government are responsible for that. And what's often not mentioned is that when inflation is high, incomes are generally deliberately squeezed in order to get inflation down again. I mean, inflation's high. There's two ways of dealing with it. You can either increase supply or you reduce demand. And we always work on the basis where it's a lot easier to reduce demand. How do you reduce demand? Give people less money to spend. So at the same time, you've got high inflation, which already looks bad in the papers. That the various levers that are going to be pulled by the Bank of England or whoever are going to be, let's stop people spending. So, they like the Bank of England during the last one was urging wage restraint, not profit restraint, not bonuses restraint, not dividends restraint, no, wage restraint, and also put interest rates up. But Trump could trigger, we know, for example, like we're going to get a bit of an increase in inflation next year. We know that because of Reeves' big spending budget. But it's only going to go up a little bit and then it's going to come back down again. So the Bank of England and the OBR are not at all concerned about that. But Trump could trigger more serious inflation if we don't play our cards right. Or even if we do. How would Labour deal with that? See, they've shown awareness that they can't afford for voters to not feel things are better under Labour. But the standard way, as I say, of dealing with inflation is stop people spending. And it's a blunt instrument that means those who weren't being lavish with their spending in the first place just get clobbered. You know, I think my favourite line from the piece was, it will be voters who set the agenda, not the politicians. Which I think is a lesson I think a lot of politicians, as well as political activists sometimes, would do well to learn. Like, you can't tell voters what they should prioritise when voting. It said in the article, you often get people who go, well, voters care about this, but we don't want them to care about that because that's not what we want to talk about. So we'll try and get voters to think this is more important. Doesn't work. Didn't even work for the Conservatives. The Conservatives have a way better chance of making it work because the media can sort of do it. We know that the media can make certain issues seem more important to the public than they really are, or less important by not talking about them at all. You know, you compare, for example, reporting on Brexit and immigration over the last few years, and now you've got a situation where the public, by and large, think immigration is way more important than it actually really is, and that Brexit is not at all important because there's hardly any discussion of it. So the media can do that a little bit in terms of raising or lowering the temperature on certain areas. But politicians themselves can't. And if they try, they'll just get it completely wrong. Rishi Sunak tried to tell the voters what they should be voting on. Didn't work. You know, it's... so that's good. That Labour are of the view that, no, we're going to listen to the public on this one. They're going to decide what our main lines are at the next election, not us. And then that is true. From a political party's point of view, you've got a choice. You can either listen and respond, or you just risk losing the election. That is the choice you've got. And the consequences for this is, although we talk of, for example, you know, with the budget, we talked about the fact, and the paper certainly talks about the fact, it's not showing much growth this side of the election. You know, the growth was sort of more loaded up later on because it's about long-term benefits. And even the limited growth for this parliament is going to look ropey now with the Trump presidency, I suppose. It's not what voters care about anyway. You know, has their standard of living increased or not? That's the question people ask, not what GDP is or how much it's grown. That being said, I will say there are a couple of abstract concepts which can affect voters, I think. So if the Tory press gets to stick on their front pages at any point in the next few years the term recession, Labour will be in trouble. Doesn't matter how well they shield people from the effects of it. If there's a recession, people tend to get worried and they apply, it's almost like they do a Brexit on themselves. They apply lower living standards on themselves. We know this during, I mean, we're not talking about that quick recession we just had, but in a more deeper recession, you have people worried about their job security, so they tend to cut back on spending, in case they need to, you know, put a bit aside in case they end up losing their jobs. And of course that hits the economy and the whole thing just ends up in a right old mess. We saw that after the banking crisis. So yeah, Labour needs to avoid that one if they can. I'd be interested to know what Labour are thinking about that one. But, you know, there were a couple of worrying signs in the article as well. Like, Labour advisors seem to lambast Harris for trying to push this message of joy. Oh, you don't want joy, cost of living crisis. You don't want it. Well, there isn't really a cost of living crisis in America. There are some people facing a cost of living crisis, but they always were. They're the people that are screwed over all the time. But also, it said they, you know, it was the wrong tone. It was the wrong tone. And they felt it vindicated their gloomier message over the past few months. And I think, no, that's completely spurious thinking. First of all, there is zero evidence that Harris's upbeat message was a problem. We don't know that. There's no evidence for that. I have not seen any polling that suggests that. If you're going to hazard a guess at what was probably the problem, it was the lack of a clear message on how your life as an American voter would be tangibly improved if Harris were made president. Absolutely no evidence that if the Democrats hadn't pushed clear policies in that regard with an upbeat campaign, that it wouldn't have worked. And on the flip side, Labour do not get to say that this dour messaging, you know, this summer that they had is vindicated, because it's like, well, polling clearly shows that it wasn't. I mean, on what are they basing this assertion that being upbeat was bad for Harris? Well, she lost the election. They wouldn't have been saying this if she'd won. It's because she lost by a few 100,000 votes. Well, Starmer's personal poll rating has nosedived, and although Labour's hasn't been hit as hard as some people are trying to make out, it has been hit. Labour advisors may be correct to say, well, you know, this is the most unpopular part of what any government does in the parliamentary cycle, and it will get better as we get towards the election. It's like, yeah, okay, hopefully that will be true. But they've got no firm evidence it will happen. They certainly have no firm evidence that a government can get away with not caring about its popularity early on, but get a boost later. No government has even tried that as far as I'm aware. But I do think Labour have fully seized what will surely be the main lesson from the US elections, as well as elections around the world. A lot has been made of the fact that by and large, incumbents that have gone to the polls in the last couple of years have tended to lose, or at least lose a lot of power. You know, the article notes, for example, if we look at America specifically, Biden created 15 million jobs. He actually had the highest wage growth, the highest GDP growth in the G7. Wages increased by nearly 20%. It's the economy, stupid. Yeah, but what's the economy to people? Because the Democrats lost. They lost. And they didn't lose because voters decided the economy wasn't the top issue. The economy was absolutely the top issue. It's just that the economy for them was not jobs growth, wage growth, or GDP growth. It was their grocery bill and how easy it was to pay for it. And Labour seem to have been making it really clear they understand that, from Starmer's statement at PMQs last week. But to this, I mean, that was like one statement, and I took that very positively, as you know. But the way these, you know, this report is describing how the party's advisors see it as well is also very encouraging. You know, calms me down a lot, because I'm looking ahead at the next few years as being like a proper Krypton factor obstacle course. And I just wish they would learn more lessons. You know, one complaint about the Democrats' campaign is it was all vibes and no substance. Well, if Labour think that they have vindicated their decision to be miserable on the basis that Harris was joyful and lost, then I'm thinking, yeah, maybe you want to hire more advisors who appreciate and understand data, because I'm not sure you've got evidence for that. I've certainly not seen it. Still, the main lesson has been learned, so there's hope. They just have to turn that lesson into practice now, which is actually the difficult part. Oh, and get a lot better at communicating. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.